A deadly blast in Pakistan targets a police office in Quetta. Celebrating the vital human connection forged through the common language of music. And how a soccer player in the U.S. balances faith and football. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now, a powerful car bomb in Pakistan's city of Quetta has killed at least 11 people and wounded about 20. Police say explosives in a car parked close to the office of the chief of provincial police were detonated by remote control Friday morning. 4 members of the armed forces were injured in the attack, according to intelligence sources. No one claimed responsibility for the attack, but a spokesman for the provincial government is blaming neighboring India for the blast. Quetta has faced a separatist insurgency for many years. In recent years, members of the local Shia population have also come under attack. British Prime Minister Theresa May says the offer she has made on the rights of European Union citizens living in Britain after Britain leaves the EU is very fair and very serious. Speaking Friday in Brussels on the second day of an EU summit, May said the government will set out more detailed proposals on Monday.
I want to reassure all those EU citizens who are in the UK, who've made their lives and homes in the UK, that no one will have to leave. We won't be seeing families split apart. This is a fair and serious offer. And I want to give those EU citizens in the UK certainty about the future of their lives. But I also want to see that certainty given to UK citizens who are living in the European Union. Of course, there will be details of this arrangement, which will be part of the negotiating process. But we've made what I believe is a very serious, a very fair offer, which will give reassurance and confidence to EU citizens living in the United Kingdom about their future.
Well, EU leaders are not convinced her proposals are adequate, and they say many questions remain. On Thursday, the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, said Europe needs to be pragmatic in dealing with Britain following the country's decision to leave the bloc, but urged cooperation in its future dealings with Britain.
The UK will leave the European Union, not Europe. For this is important to pave the way also for good relations after the separation.
Well, on the issue of migration, Tajani said it is vital that Europe devise a solution to the current migration crisis affecting Europe. He said Europe needs to do more to stem the tide of migrants traveling to Europe from sub-Saharan Africa through Libya. EU leaders opened a 2-day summit Thursday in Brussels to address everything from Britain's planned exit, terrorism, migration, and other issues facing Europe. Well, our donors are pledging nearly $352 million to help Uganda cope with a massive influx of refugees fleeing conflict in South Sudan. The United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and Uganda are hosting a meeting in the capital Kampala on Friday, aimed at raising some $2 billion to plug funding shortages for the East African country's surging refugee population. Uganda is hosting about 1.3 million refugees, of which an estimated 950,000 have arrived from South Sudan. Journalist Halima Athumani is at the Refugee Summit in Kampala and now joins us live via Skype. Halima, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited the Uganda refugee camps. Describe to us, how are the conditions there?
Vincent, yesterday we were with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in Mvepi in Arua, that is in northern Uganda. And I must say the situation there is very dire. One of the conversations that he had, which was rather passionate for him, was with a woman who would run with her family. And he asked her and said, "Why did you run away?" For her, she said she was running away from the war, but mainly she was also running away from hunger. So for her, it was more of running away from a hard place onto, she was caught up between a rock and a hard place. Imagine running away from war, running away from hunger, but also coming into a country that is struggling to feed the huge population of refugees that it has. And that's what the situation is like in most of the refugee camps. Most of the refugees are complaining about not having food. Some of them are missing the food rations. They're given food that is supposed to take them through a 30-day cycle, and it's really becoming very difficult for the World Food Programme to feed them.
And now we know that the summit was seeking to get at least about $2 billion worth of pledges, but up to this point, the figures are much smaller than that. Why is that the case?
Very true. I mean, there were several pledges coming in. For example, we had maybe the least amounts coming in from a country like Somalia that contributed 100,000. We had our neighbors Kenya contribute 200,000 US dollars, and of course we had the biggest donors being the EU with about 94 million US dollars. So the money is coming in little by little. Antonio Guterres did say that he was hopeful more countries will pledge, but right now it seems most countries have their hands tied. They do not have the money to release and to help Uganda feed and sustain these millions of refugees that they are currently hosting.
And Halima, for Mr. Guterres, this refugee issue is rather familiar to him, right?
Extremely familiar. Yesterday, he mentioned that 10 years back, he was in Uganda at the same refugee camp. And at that time, I think that was when we had the war between South Sudan and Sudan. And at that time, the refugees that came from South Sudan at the time came into Uganda, and he said, I was there with these women and children and men. They were singing songs of joy, and for them, they had hope that they were going back to a country to build a new life, to build a new future. But right now, they are running away from their country. So for him, it really pained him to see that the people he thought he actually met way back and hoping that they were going back to their country to rebuild their lives are actually coming back and are going through this hard situation. So yes, it was very, very personal for him.
Thank you. We hope for the best and hope that the conflicts will end so people don't have to be in refugee camps. Halima, thank you very much for your reporting.
Thank you, Vincent.
That's Halima Athumani, who is a Uganda-based journalist. Well, down south, Zimbabweans vote to elect a new president in 2018, but the country's political future remains uncertain. The only president Zimbabweans have known is Robert Mugabe, who has ruled the Southern African country since 1980. Here's Africa 54's Esther Gidoyuwat.
Over the last decade, many Zimbabweans have been forced to flee their country due to economic decline and political turmoil. But political opposition is rising against the 93-year-old president, and no one is certain about the country's political future. I sat down with Ambassador Arikana Chihombori Kwao, the African Union ambassador to the U.S. and a native of Zimbabwe, to get her perspective.
Zimbabweans are very resilient people. Now, who would have thought we would still be standing with everything that we have gone through? Zimbabweans will make it.
As Zimbabweans consider their voting choices for president in July 2018, Ambassador Chihombori has a message for her fellow citizens.
My message to the Zimbabweans, particularly the ones in the diaspora, being that we're here in the diaspora, I encourage Zimbabweans to participate in the electoral process. We have elections coming up. We need parliamentarians. We need new parties coming in. So I encourage the citizens of Zimbabwe to get involved, particularly the diaspora. Don't just sit back here and complain and fire charges at governments. It's not just Zimbabwe, and I'm saying this is true of all African countries. Don't just sit in the diaspora and complain about what's happening at home.
Over the years, Western countries have cut or reduced aid to Zimbabwe, citing human rights abuses and lack of political transparency.
So you have sanctions. We have sanctions. And this America, the imperialist, at the top of it all.
We as Africans, we got to move away from this aid mode that we seem to have been perpetually in. We need to get ourselves in a position where we can be self-sufficient. So our relationship at this point tends to be dictated by, in some cases, need for aid. We got to get away from that.
I would like to know from you about the leadership of President Robert Mugabe. Some people, in a nutshell, will say he has really failed Zimbabwe. Is that a correct assessment?
I can't answer the question as to whether or not he has failed or been good for Zimbabwe. What I can tell you is what's happening in Zimbabwe, rising of oppositions, is nothing new. is happening even here in this country. That is just the nature of the political process. I don't think we should single out Zimbabwe and say what's happening in Zimbabwe is unique. It's happening all over the world. We have elections. Let's see what happens.
The country's economy continues on a downward spiral, and the cash crunch is forcing banks to reduce daily withdrawal limits. In recent years, Mugabe has been seeking sporadic treatment in Singapore, raising questions among Zimbabweans on how long he can hang on to power. Astegidhu Ewart, VOA News, Washington.
Well, back in Washington, former U.S. President Bill Clinton predicts America's leadership in international development will survive if aid and relief workers focus on their work and not on Washington politics. Clinton spoke this week to leaders of more than 100 U.S.-based nonprofit organizations during a three-day conference in Washington. It was the first major meeting of international aid groups since President Donald Trump proposed cuts to foreign aid in his 2018 budget. Africa 54's Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick was at the conference.
Bill Clinton came to Washington to speak not just as a former president, but as a humanitarian. He urged international development and relief workers at the Interaction Forum to stay the course and embrace globalism, despite the current dynamic of the us versus them political conflict.
We are passing through a perfectly predictable period of reaction to the rapid rate of change economically and socially all over the world, which leaves a lot of people feeling left out and left behind, economically, socially, even psychologically, feeling that the only response is anger and resentment.
Clinton did not mention President Donald Trump's name, but took aim at his proposal to scale back America's foreign assistance spending.
It's a bad thing if the government cuts USAID, because it's a little bit of money doing an outsized amount of good.
Mr. Clinton hailed America's long-standing commitment to helping the world's most vulnerable people, pointing to development successes in Africa and other parts of the developing world. He spoke directly to concerns by humanitarian and development organizations who are worried about proposed foreign aid budget cuts. The United States spends 1% of its federal budget, roughly $60 billion a year, responding to famine and natural disasters, as well as improving education, sanitation, medical care and equality for women around the world, primarily through the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. The Trump administration is proposing to merge USAID into the State Department and slash spending by more than a third. U.S. humanitarian and relief agencies who rely on this money say gutting development assistance could have life and death consequences for the world's poor and put America's own prosperity and security at risk.
This is, in the broader scheme of the budget, not a huge chunk of money and pays enormous dividends as far as our leadership in the world and just doing the right thing.
Millions of children are alive today that wouldn't be alive without the kinds of interventions that America and others around the world have engaged in, for instance, global public health.
I'm encouraged, though, by what the conversation was just last week with the Senate and the administration, with Secretary of State Tillerson, and really there was a lot of pushback from Congress.
Aid agencies hope bipartisan opposition from Congress will prevent dramatic cuts in foreign aid, though they do expect some reductions. Clinton advised NGOs to work smarter during challenging times and not lose hope.
Every time you do anything in this space, you will increase the necessary, or at least the probability that you get the necessary public support for what you're doing. And you will hasten the day when we will give up the us and them and realize, look, the world we're living in requires us to find positive sum solutions.
Welcome words for aid workers from a former president widely regarded as an international development hero. Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick, VOA News, Washington.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends also. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Coming up, documenting the collaboration between British-based musicians and migrants at the Calais camps. Stay with us.
My name's Carla Babb, and I work the Pentagon beat. That access helps me to do better stories. Every day it's my responsibility to collect all of the defense news. It keeps our VOA viewers informed. I get to travel all across the globe. Anything that's defense related and how to protect and keep people safe, that's where I'll go. So it's never a dull moment at the Pentagon. My name is Carla Babb. This is my beat.
Well, in Friday's business report, U.S. stocks opened slightly higher as the Standard & Poor's 500 and NASDAQ are on track to end the week flat to slightly higher. With more details, here's Africa 54's business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting from the NASDAQ market side in New York.
U.S. stocks opened mixed as the major averages are on track to close flat to slightly higher this week as the halfway mark of 2017 approaches. Let's review what has been working. The technology, healthcare, and consumer discretionary sectors continue to lead the market, advancing 19, 15.8, and 10.4% respectively. These sectors took the reins as 2017 kicked off, and investors who benefited from the Trump trade searched for areas offering more value in the aftermath of the post-election run-up. The S&P 500 has advanced nearly 9% as of Thursday in 2017, yet earnings expectations haven't budged and full-year economic forecasts have been reduced. U.S. GDP is expected to be 2.3% in 2017, according to Action Economics, below the 3.3% forecasted in December. Now, even though oil has been under pressure recently, falling deeper into bear market territory, which is defined as a 20% pullback from recent highs, it still is a rebound from 2016 when levels hit $26 a barrel back in February. Now, boasting the best growth on a relative basis out of the 11 S&P 500 sectors, energy earnings will finally show growth after contracting significantly for 2 consecutive years. In the aggregated estimates, financials, technology, and materials, they're all expected to report double-digit earnings in 2017. Energy, financials, and consumer sectors, that includes staples and discretionary, will largely be the drivers of revenue growth, which is expected to improve about 4.5% in 2017 from less than 3% in 2016. Again, this is on a relative basis, and those sectors are comping against poor numbers. Quickly, I just want to touch on African business news. African ministers and business people joined their American counterparts in Washington, D.C. last week at the U.S.-Africa Business Summit to discuss greater economic engagement despite lingering uncertainty over the United States' position toward global trade. 3 key topics were discussed: the U.S.-Africa relationship, pandemic response and partnership, and regional integration. We're going to get into more detail on this for Wednesday's live segment, but the developments were quite encouraging coming out of this meeting. From the NASDAQ market site in New York, I'm Jill Malandrino, and this is Africa 54 Business News.
Well, refugees and music. Well, Sounds Unseen is a photographic memoir by British photographer Sarah Hickson. It opened on May 4th, and viewers Heather Maxwell went to see what it was all about. The memoir documents the story of a music recording project in the refugee camps of Calais and Dunkirk, northern France, in 2016. The recording project is now a CD called the Calais Sessions.
This is an exhibition of photographs that I took over a 6-month period in the refugee camps in northern France, in Calais and Dunkirk. between December 2015 and early summer 2016. For those of you who know the camps, they're no longer there. They were a temporary camp, temporary settlements, unofficial settlements where about 6,000 people fleeing their homes in conflict and war had arrived and built makeshift shelters and tents. And I was there traveling with a project called the Calais Sessions, which was a music project. And the idea was very simple, was to travel, an eclectic group of musicians and sound engineers from the UK traveled to France with a load of instruments and sound gear and a portable sound studio and a generator, and found musicians in the camp, and we set up a temporary recording studio, and that was the stage for people's voices to be heard and their music to be recorded, and music became the connecting point. And I was there through a lot of those visits, recording those moments photographically. This wall contains about 128 images, which we created, made a collage. Who are the women there in the center? The women here, we met at the Evangelical Church, which you see here, which is obviously just a tent with a simple wooden frame and a cross. There were women in the camps, but they tended to be with children in a much more secluded area. But we could hear the singing. We were there one Sunday morning and we could hear this beautiful singing coming from the tent. So we went to talk to the pastor and asked if we could come and join in. And we were there with a group of singers from the UK, some gospel singers. So what happened at that moment was a beautiful exchange of songs of praise between the gospel singers from the UK and the Ethiopian and Eritrean women. And the next day we went back to London and the newspapers were full of images of this church that you can see behind you being demolished as part of the southern area of the camp that was being bulldozed by that point. So very poignant. We were so used to hearing stories about the masses, the swarms of people arriving, the danger. There was nothing about the individuals, nothing about who they were, nothing about what they were, what was close to them, what meant something to them. And also, obviously, there's a language barrier, and yet with music, that is an immediate way to reduce the differences between people. Here we have Asi, who was from Ethiopia, playing the guitar with David Wilson, and they were just sitting outside the tents, and David was teaching Asi some chords, some Western chords, A, C, and G, and then Asi, after about 20 minutes, turned to David and he said, "That's great, would you like to now learn some Ethiopian pentatonic scales?" And so then ensued an entirely different teaching session between Asi and David. And there were moments like that all the time. People are dancing and there was a drumming, and it was just a spontaneous outbreak of joy in the midst of a horrible place.
Well, that was Heather Maxwell, host of VOA's Music Time in Africa radio show, who produced that report. Well, it's time now for a short break to come on Africa 54. Do faith and football mix? Well, one professional athlete in the U.S. capital says yes. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines.
In South Sudan, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the country's leaders must end a civil war that has killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. In the DRC, at least 12 people are killed in the northeastern part of the country in heavy fighting between the army and militia. In Somalia, at least 7 dead and 12 others wounded by a car bomb targeting a police station claimed by Al-Shabaab in the capital, Mogadishu. In Gabon, the International Criminal Court investigates claims of post-election violence last year in a move welcomed by rights activists.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Now, these popsicles could become the new trend in Berlin, ice cocktails. They contain 11% alcohol, and its makers hope they can achieve a breakthrough with their product as temperatures in Germany are expected to remain high over the summer. In past weeks, temperatures in the capital have reached 30 degrees Celsius. So far, there are 6 flavors, and among them are some of the most popular, inspired by international long drinks, concentrated into 36 milliliter popsicles. Well, and top Senegalese golfer Samba Niang is working on his swing at the Almadies Golf Club in Dakar, Senegal. He was recently accepted for the 2017 Korea Professional Golfers Association Frontier Golf Tour, a key step that would ensure he is in the running for the 2020 Olympics. One potential hurdle, the lack of sponsorship for African players. That is what inspired Niang to launch his own golf clothing brand, Samba Golf, the first African golf brand. The clothing range is sold online in Senegal and Morocco. Niang hopes the Olympics exposure could help the sport soar throughout the continent. And that is what is trending today. Now, Ramadan is Islam's holy month. It is time of reflection, honoring the first revelation of the Quran to Muhammad. It is also a month of fasting during which able-bodied Muslims abstain from food and drink from sunrise to sunset, which pose unique challenges for professional athletes. Now, viewers Arash Arabasadi reports.
Bilal Hamid is a star goalkeeper for Washington's Major League Soccer club, DC United.
Obviously, this isn't a big soccer country, but I've been a massive soccer fan my whole life. It's a big part of my family and a part of where my family originates from.
Hamid, who goes by Bill, is a first-generation American whose Muslim family comes from Sierra Leone. He prays with them before games and alone when he takes the field.
I'm usually standing on my goal line. I'll say Al-Fatiha right before the game. Right when we cross the white line, I'll say another Al-Fatiha. And then just from there, I just focus my mind solely on that game.
But this month is Ramadan, and able-bodied Muslims are required to fast. And so Hamid balances his faith with his professional life.
It's not easy being on the field, especially in times like this where the heat is, it is going to get bad. So I want to have the right things in my body to make sure I'm, giving myself the energy and the strength to play as well as I can.
Otherwise, Hamid says, he follows tradition.
But I know if we don't have a game coming up, I'm going to make the right choice and I'm going to fast and make sure I get my prayers in and make sure that the things that I put in my life are the right choices on those days that I'm fasting.
A disciplined labor of love.
It's not easy to be a faithful servant in this religion, but nothing's meant to be easy, so you just have to do your best.
Hamid is one of the best goalkeepers in Major League Soccer, and he also plays for the U.S. national team. But it's the lessons he learned from his family and faith that guide his life on and off the field. Rasher Basadi, VOA News, Washington.
Well, thanks, Arash. That's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. When something loses its original shape or form, it does not look very natural or comfortable.
Bent out of shape.
Hey, did you tell Greg about my dinner party?
Yeah, I did. I thought he was invited.
Well, now he's all bent out of shape because I didn't invite him.
I'm sorry.